with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, the economy. The economy seems to be kind of chugging along here. And I got to tell you, I just think things are starting to get better. You know, I could just see far more people out on the streets now than I did before. I mean, before it was great. You know, you go anywhere you want, you know, during rush hour and you just got there like right away. It's not like that. I mean, there's a lot of people out. Parking lots are full. I mean, it's you know, parking lots that had nobody, now they got a lot of people. And I just think generally companies are doing better. The stock market, I think that the outlook for the economy, but we got an election coming up. And, you know, I don't know, you know, what the outcome of that is going to be, but there are two stark differences, very stark differences on what that economy, what the American economy should look like, you know, now and into the future. And Biden has no problem talking about massive tax increases. He has no problem talking about that. Has no problem talking about very, very zealous regulation coming back. AOC this week came out and said, yeah. You know, Biden's going to get elected on this sort of progressive light sort of agenda. But don't worry, once he's elected, you know, we're going to push him right over the cliff into the progressive nirvana that she advocates for. And I don't think he's strong enough to stand up to it. What do you think?
Well, having said that, is he strong enough to stand up to it? Of course not. I mean, he's the man who actually read the instructions in the teleprompter the other day when he was answering questions to teenagers in a prearranged Q&A. I was surprised it actually didn't say Sony, because on the bottom of the teleprompter it says Sony. So he probably could have read that as well. You know, I think this is one election that the differences are so stark and so dangerous and so different and so obvious that I shudder when I listen to some folks say, yeah, I'm going to go for Biden. It's like, really? Why? Because the difference is, one, we have a growing, wonderful economy. People believe in themselves. The stock market keeps, you know, doing well. People have a piece of the action. They feel like they're living and fulfilling their American dream. On the other side, when you listen to Mr. Biden read not Sony, read the other part of the teleprompter, he's saying that, well, I'm going to raise taxes. I'm telling you right now, 80% of this country is going to have taxes go up. It's going to be terrible. We're going to have, all this is going to occur. We're going to have, Obamacare is going to come back. I'm going to put that back in. He's going to take us out of all the different scenarios that we're in overseas that the president put us in. And he's going to go back to the Iran deal. He's going to go back to the Paris Accord, all the stuff that was out there. And the difference is, one, an incredible opportunity for this country to get back where we were with the lowest unemployment ever in the history of the country, when everyone shared in that dream, except, of course, the Democrats couldn't see it. Or you're going to go down a very stark, dark, apocalyptic, sort of like the money games, the Hunger Games, where you're really not quite sure where you're going, except you are going to give up your liberties. You are going to give up your freedoms, and you're going to start going in a non-constitutional environment, which is going to change everything real quick, real fast, a la Bernie Sanders, AOC, and all these other losers that are out there. So, having said that, yeah, I think it's a very interesting time for us to be out there watching this.
So, Rich, we got a great first guest, and, to continue the discussion about the economy and what happens next, and really what happens after November, after the presidential election. We're very pleased to have on with us Nick Stehle, who's the vice president at the Foundation for Government Accountability, and he's just, about a week ago, published a piece in the Washington Examiner. I love the Washington Examiner, by the way. I read it every day, and the piece is entitled, "The Recovering Economy Will Get Even Better If Trump is Reelected." Well, that's a hell of a statement. Nick, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you for having me.
So, obviously, Rich and I kind of set this up, and, you have this huge contrast of, how this country should move forward, not just post-coronavirus, but just, just how we act as a country and how economically we act and how our entrepreneurs and our small businesses and our risk takers, how they will interact with this economy, how our exporters will interact with the world, how our manufacturers will either come back or not. Very, very big differences of the type of economy that we'll have in the future. I don't know. I mean, on one side, it's very scary. On the other side, I believe it's very optimistic. How do you see this? I mean, obviously, you're saying if President Trump is reelected, that you think that the economy will come roaring back.
Well, that's right. I do think that. And I think if you want to see what the economy is going to look like after the pandemic and in a second term, the best way to look, I think, is just to go back and look at the economy right before the pandemic. We had record low or near record low unemployment. We had the economy firing on all cylinders. We had stock markets setting records. We had wages growing in ways that they haven't in many, many years. And there were more jobs available than workers to fill them. At one point, there were 7 million open jobs. And in a country of 300 and some odd million people, that's a lot of open jobs. And so, we know that we can do it. We've seen this country do it. We've seen the American worker do it, and we've seen President Trump do it. And so then we start to look and see, well, what happened during the pandemic? And we know the government ultimately made the decision to cause all of those layoffs. And then you had the catastrophic CARES Act unemployment bonus, which meant that 7 out of every 10 workers, they were making more on unemployment than they could at their jobs. So that just really set us back. And you had refusal to work, and you had out-of-control fraud in the unemployment system. And so, there were just all the wrong incentives, but we're finally starting to see that come back the other way. And now we're seeing just incredible data coming out over the last couple of months.
Well, what's interesting is the fact that since March, April, when we lost all these jobs, almost 30 million jobs went out the window. We have gained back almost 50% of all those jobs at this point. And it's being said that we'll do even better by the end of September. And that is remarkable. I mean, even the Fed's chairman, Powell, this week said that, he believes that the response was even faster than they thought it would be. And they're encouraged by it, and they're going to work with us. They're going to hang in there and give the opportunity for the economy to get back where it needs to be and where it can be. And we would probably be doing even better, Nick, I guess, if the Democrat states that are so big, like Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and, of course, California, would let their people go back to work, those numbers would come up even faster. So I think you're 100% correct in your hypothesis, and I think it's not even a hypothesis. If Trump is reelected, this country will, I believe, absolutely zoom back where we were and do even better, because people are so excited and so ready to get back and have a life. Don't you agree, Nick?
I do. In fact, you're already seeing that. In fact, just today there are some brand new numbers out. New unemployment claims hit the lowest point since the pandemic hit, down 35% just since July. 3.5 million fewer continuing claims since the end of July. And that's also the lowest point since the pandemic hit. So those are just really, really incredible numbers. And I will say, this is one of the reasons why, elections have consequences. We start thinking about what happens after the election. Well, I can tell you one of the things that's going to happen is they're going to make a huge push to bail out states, especially blue states that already had massive deficit spending, that had horrible financial problems, a lot of it caused by runaway spending, especially on Medicaid. Those states want to bail out. And one of the reasons they want to bail out is so that they can keep their states shut down. It's the reason why you see California starting and having to make some moves towards reopening. I know New York is starting to have to make a few moves towards reopening. They don't want to, but if they don't get that bailout money, they're going to have to, because they've got to have the revenue. So this is all really compounding, and it's the reason why in most of the country, outside of just a handful of states, you've seen millions of people leave unemployment. There's now almost 6 million open jobs. 1.7 million business applications have been filed since the pandemic hit. So, we're really starting to see in some places the economy just really come back to life, and I'm excited to see that happen in all 50 states.
So, Nick, you just mentioned that, the blue states want to stay closed. Do you think that's true if Biden were to win? I mean, would they all be racing to open up, and they'll be all racing to be taking the vaccine, and they'll, happy days are here again? I mean, isn't this just all part of politicking right now? States that stay closed and states that stay open?
Well, you would think so, and I don't want that to be the case. Either. But I'll tell you, if you look at the pandemic assistance and the CARES Act, that $600 bonus, that turned out to be about exactly $15 per hour, and I don't think that was a mistake. So I do think it would probably be a mistake to assume that they won't try to keep things closed past the election, because there's certainly, I think, a political reason to try to keep things closed as long as possible and keep as many people dependent on government as possible.
Well, that's a scary thought, and I got to tell you, as a U.S. manufacturer and having 5 factories in this country, it is very hard to get people right now to work. Very hard in manufacturing, distribution, all sorts of jobs. You would think that once this $600 went away, now I guess now it's $300, that there would be a lot of people out there looking for work, but they're not. And let's keep that for another day. But that's a big issue, is that, we just don't have people to fulfill our jobs. So I doubt that this unemployment number is as high as it is, because I can't find people to work. Hey, Nick, it's a great conversation. I like what you had to say in your piece in the Washington Examiner. We're really, really happy that you joined us today. Nick Stehle, Vice President at the Foundation for Government Accountability. Nick, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, we have Seth Barron. He's the associate editor at the City Journal. He's also the project director of the NYC Initiative at the Manhattan Institute. We have a very, very important discussion about the Macy Day Parade. I mean, Rich, you're from Manhattan. De Blasio just canceled it. That can't be true. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, we're going to talk about New York City. We've been talking a lot about New York City.
Oh, you can't help it.
Well, you're from New York City.
You can't help it.
That's where you grew up.
Yes, it is.
It must have been incredible growing up in New York City. I grew up in North Jersey, but Northwest Jersey, which is, it's very beautiful, the mountains and lakes and farms and all of that. And we're about 60 miles due west of the city. But, it was like a very different environment. It was like the woods. That was the forests. And
I spent my
we have a lot
there.
of forests out. Right. If you're standing in a building in Manhattan and you kind of look across the Hudson and back there, and you can kind of see in the haze these mountains that's out there. You can see those. Yeah, that's where I grew up. But you grew up right in the middle of it all.
Yeah, I grew up at 20th Street between 3rd and Irving.
Between 3rd and Irving.
3rd and Irving.
Wow, very fascinating. Yeah. Very fascinating part. Oh, and all that great stuff down there too. Not far from Chinatown, Greenwich Village.
Yeah, exactly.
The Bowery.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We always went to the Bowery so we can get drunk and fall over with the other drunks. Yeah, my parents encouraged me to do that.
If you were old enough,
they wanted me to go there instead of Washington Square. Was probably safer.
If you were old enough to sit on a bar stool and your head was above the bar, they would serve you. We knew that from New Jersey, right? Because the drinking age was lower in Manhattan.
The truth of the matter is, it was phony draft cards, except I looked like I was 15. So I was like, yeah, how old are you? I'm 10. I'm 19 years old. And the guy didn't believe me. You know what I mean?
Well, let's talk more about New York.
Great place.
We got to get that city back on its feet, man.
Well, got to get de Blasio out. What are you talking about? This guy has no idea what he's doing with the city. Rudy Giuliani, let's get him back in. You got to get him back in and save that city. He did it once. He can do it again.
Well, let's bring on our next guest, Seth Barron. and
Barron.
I'm sorry, Chef Seth Barron. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry about that, Seth. And he is the associate editor at the City Journal. Seth, welcome to Made in America.
Hey, thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here.
Sorry I messed up your name there, and I'm glad
no
that Rich
problem.
corrected me there. But
Sure.
Anyway, we love New York. We love New York, the greatest city in the world. It truly is. I've lived all over the world. I spent 20-odd years living in Asia. You know, I've been to all these big cities around the world and lived in the Asian cities. And I got to know, New York, it is the best. Incredible. The culture, everything going on there. And de Blasio has now just canceled the annual Macy's Day Parade on Thanksgiving, citing coronavirus concerns. Mm-hmm. But he ignores left-wing activists who violate City Hall's own mitigation efforts. That was a quote from you, by the way, Seth.
Oh, okay.
If you didn't recognize your words,
sounds great.
And you got all of this stuff going on down at what Washington Square.
Washington Square.
Down in all of this stuff. That's
City Hall,
Union Square. All of these places.
Police department, and no one and all over. I mean, stunned. It was in mid-Manhattan. I mean, they're just rioting, going crazy, hundreds of thousands of people. We have burning, screaming, yelling, not wearing masks, some wearing masks, breathing on each other. Oh, that's okay. Because apparently, I guess, Seth, the virus must know who are the friendly protesters and who are the folks who really just want to go out and buy something.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, here's the thing about the Macy's Day Parade. I suppose, look, if you're going to make an argument that a parade is too dangerous, well, then maybe you can't have it. I don't know. To me, it seems like if you're a vulnerable person, if you're on chemotherapy, if you're very old, you would know enough to stay home at that point. And everybody understands the mask mandates. So I don't really understand why a parade is out of the question. But more importantly, it's like the Macy's Day Parade is, New York City thrives on tourism. We get like 63 million tourists a year. And they spend thousands of dollars each. So we're talking about, over $100 billion in revenue that the city desperately needs right now. It's businesses, it's hotels. Okay, we're not at that point yet. But it seems like the mayor should be making every effort to show the world, hey, New York's coming back. And having a virtual Macy's Day Parade or whatever it is that he suggests that he's going to do, some kind of, event that's going to be virtual. I don't even understand how you can have a virtual parade. It just sounds like nonsense. Meanwhile, let me tell you, in Washington Square Park, every weekend night, the Revolutionary Communist Party, which, runs this Refuse Fascism movement, they have a protest party. And they have DJs, and there's hundreds and hundreds of, maybe 1,000 people, like partying until 3 a.m. Tons of cops around, but the cops have basically been told just to let them do it. Now, maybe some of the people are wearing masks, maybe some of them aren't, but they say it's in protest. So the mayor basically is allowing anything under the guise of protest to go on. Marches, campaigns. So it seems to me like anything normal and healthy and wholesome, like going to church, a concert, that's all out. Parades, that's out. You can't do that. Because the people who do those sort of things are easy to order around. They'll obey the law. Whereas the people who want to riot, have protests, dance parties in the middle of the park, well, they're going to do it anyway, and it doesn't really pay to try to quash it. So New York's in a pickle right now. I would say that's true.
Hey, Seth, we got to take a quick break. Can you stay around as we come back?
Sure.
We're talking to Seth Barron. He is the associate editor at the City Journal, and still a lot more to talk about our great city, New York, and getting it back on its feet. Stay with us.
Made in America. sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury. I'm together with our co-host, Dr. Rich Rothman, and Seth Barron, who is the associate editor at the City Journal. And we're talking about New York City, and Mayor de Blasio has just canceled the Macy Day Parade, which is Thanksgiving, which is still,
it's Thanksgiving. It's the most important thing that happens on Thanksgiving Day, that people go out.
Everyone around the country is watching it.
Everyone's
got their television.
Looked, rain, it didn't make any difference. I remember going to it for years. My father, my mother, my sister, and I would all go up there. We'd watch it. Of course, my father was an executive at Gimbel Brothers, so he had to hide himself a little bit. But it was a very important thing. Seth, this fits in to exactly the cancel culture that's out there. I'm sorry. This is not just, it's because it's not safe. No, this is part of the cancel culture. Because anything that we look back on that has a legacy.
And nostalgia.
Something that means something, that makes you what
very
you are
American,
today.
Very American.
Well, think for a second. One of the most popular movies ever at Christmas time is The Miracle on 34th Street. I love that movie. I love It's a Wonderful. I'm so, hammy about the whole thing. I love all those stories. Because if you understand those stories, you understand how you were brought up and what it meant, and the social mores that were out there, that people got together and helped each other, and every time, an angel gets its wings, the bell rings and so. This is the things that we look forward to. And when the folks such as de Blasio and those on the far left, in the socialists, and if you look back at de Blasio's history, he's a Marxist. He went to Central America to support the Marxists. You want to go into that discussion, we can do it. But the point of the matter is, he's taking that away from us. He's taking away our history, all part of what's been going on. And I absolutely, as an old New Yorker, resent it. And I devotedly and adamantly resent it, Seth. I really do. What do you think the folks up there are going to do about it?
Well, about this, not much. We're dealing with all kinds of things right now. The economy in New York City is kind of collapsing. Nobody's going to work in the offices in Midtown. Look, you can't really blame them. If you're allowed to work at home, you're going to work at home. But, people are struggling. Crime is on the increase. So, frankly, not being able to go to the Thanksgiving Day Parade is probably not at the top of most people's list right now, given that Thanksgiving's still a few months off. Though, I just think it's a really bad sign. It's a bad sign of where we're headed. De Blasio can't get his act together. He keeps postponing starting school up again. He's very much subject to the whims of the teachers union and the other public sector unions who, effectively order him around and tell him what to do. So, like I said, New York's in a bad position.
So this, Neil, this continues down that road of just make everybody miserable. That's very important for the Democrats right now. It's very important for the progressives. It's very important for AOC and Bernie. Bernie's always miserable. Just look at him; he's miserable. He looks like all my old uncles when I was a kid growing up, and they hated everyone. They did. They're East Side New Yorkers, and they hated everyone. Never tried. They didn't even like their wives. They were miserable to everybody. Really, at Hanukkah, they gave out matzah. They're really horrible people. But to keep everybody on edge. Not let the kids go to school, not let them socialize, don't go to games. You can't go to a Broadway show. You can't go to a museum. God forbid you go to the library. My God, every Thursday, as a kid, I went to the library on East 23rd Street, down from where I lived in Gramercy Park. It was just a magnificent life. So they're taking away everything that means something to those in their individual cities. It appears that the progressives are just stripping them of it, making them miserable, so they can be ripe, if you understand history, when socialists come in. Well, we need a change. We need a change. We have to change. You have to change the government. Things aren't going well. And that upsets me that that's happening, Seth.
Sure. A couple of years ago, de Blasio in an interview said that, if he had his druthers, he would get to decide, the proper use and function of every building. Who gets to live there, how much rent is paid, how they're built, I mean, this is basically his dream of how things should work. And right now, I mean, there's people in the city who are just a little bit to his left who are clearly hungry, and they're praying for more collapse because, as they see it, if real estate in New York City really collapses, well, then the government can take it all over and convert it into land banks. Basically, convert empty hotels into affordable housing, turn all the buildings into office space for community groups, or, essentially socialize all property in New York. So it's kind of sick that people who claim that what they really care about is helping working people, they want it to happen through total immiseration of the population, like everybody to be poor so they can be in control, which is, basically how socialist governments come to power generally.
That's scary stuff, Seth.
Right.
How much longer are we stuck with this guy? I mean, when is the next election, and how much, when is he term limited out?
We have him for another 15 months. He's out on January 1st, 22. But, frankly, there's nothing to get that excited about because nobody who's, in the running to replace him is really any better. I mean, the controller of the city, Scott Stringer, is already promising to outdo de Blasio in terms of, more spending, more of the war on inequality. Let me just say one thing. Like, New York City's always been a place of opportunity. And if you're going to have opportunity, you're going to have some inequality. People don't come to New York to be equal. They come here to get rich. That's why people move here. That's why 40% of the population was born somewhere else, because they come here so they can do better. If you're going to have that situation, you're going to have poor people, you're going to have rich people. The question is there room to improve? And that's what people want. The fact that somebody has $1 billion is nothing to me if I can, do well. But all they're concerned about is leveling the field, destroying opportunity, and, essentially being in charge of redistribution of wealth. So, whether de Blasio's in or not at this point, New York City has been rather corrupted, and the political system is pretty bad. So, I'm not so sanguine about the future.
Wow. So sad for the greatest city of the world. And Seth, I read the other day that about half of the people in New York, they said the wealthy people in New York, are looking to leave. Imagine that. But we got to go. And okay. Seth, I really appreciate it. Seth Barron, the associate editor of City Journal. Seth, thanks for being on the show. You're an excellent guest.
Thanks a lot. Glad to do it.
Coming up, we have Marc Levinson, who is the author of Outside the Box. We're going to talk about trade. You don't want to miss it. Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. So, Rich, we got a real treat. It's all about jobs and, what kind of jobs are we going to have? And, we want good paying jobs. And, countries are really, really focused on creating the opportunities for their citizens because that is what generates their tax base to pay for all the things that they want for their people. I mean, good roads and schools and universities. And it really depends on who's winning on the economic front. And by the way, in the economic front, it doesn't mean that there has to be losers. I mean, everybody could be winners. It's just got to be fair. It's got to be level. And we hear these words, and they're cliches. But the fact is that America's gotten a pretty raw deal. And can we get a better deal? But the fact that this world is becoming a smaller place, that train has left the station. We're not going back to what it was. And it should be exciting for American entrepreneurs that there is a big world out there.
Well, it's illogical to think that we're going to stop globalization. That's not going to happen.
Put the genie back in the bottle.
It's just not going to happen.
Come on. Let's find a way that we can unshackle the American entrepreneur and give them the opportunities, because the American entrepreneur will make us proud?
Well, the thing that I learned, Neil, by being in Latin America for 27 years with my other companies, is that trade liberates. And to me, trade liberates. Trade gives people an opportunity. Whether you're in Latin America and you're involved in an economy that doesn't have a middle class, because forever it didn't have a middle class in Latin America, but starting with trade, growth of trade in the late 80s and the privatizations and all that went into it, it kind of liberated the entire environment, the entire continent. And people got very excited by it. And everybody, seriously, no joke, everybody celebrated something out of that and got something out of that. And it really became sort of like a bulletless revolution, a socioeconomic revolution, which was unusual for Latin America. So, and I was down there for that, and I saw it, and it was just, I love it. I mean, so you're not going to go back in the bottle. The genie's out, you're right. You got to look forward, you got to make it fair, you got to make it right, and it's a win-win for everyone. Everybody can benefit.
So that's well said, and
that's it for me.
That's a great intro to our guest, Marc Levinson, who is an economist, historian, and author of the book Outside the Box, who says that globalization is here and it's here to stay. Marc, welcome to Made in America.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be with you.
So, globalization has got kind of like a bad name, right? I mean, it's just kind of like NAFTA got a bad name. So we had to give it another name. And so now we call it the USMCA. But essentially, it's NAFTA with some
2.0
upgrades to it and, bringing it back, bringing it 20 years forward. So, why has globalization got a bad name, and why can't people see that it's here to stay, and we should celebrate it and we should embrace it, but we should make it work better for us?
Well, globalization is here to stay, but not quite in the way that we've known it for the past few years. What I've written in my book, which is a really concise history of globalization, is how different the period roughly between 1987 and 2010, 2012 was. This was a different phase of globalization that revolved around these global value chains, right? These very long-distance supply chains that businesses built themselves. That was really different from the way that globalization worked before. And I argue in the book that globalization went too far for two reasons, really. One is that a lot of the decisions that were made were very highly subsidized. Okay, economists like to talk about how trade brings market forces to bear, but a lot of the decisions weren't really made based on market forces. Shipping was subsidized, manufacturing locations were subsidized, and on and on. The other is that businesses really misjudged the risks of globalization. And it turned out that a lot of the supply chains weren't as reliable as they thought. Many companies lost a good bit of money on this. And that's meant some rethinking. It doesn't mean the end of globalization, but it means that companies are more careful about how they build their supply chains, and they're relying on them a bit less than they used to.
So how do you think that this plays out, though, in American politics? You can see what's going on right now, and it's really quite fashionable for both parties right now to beat up on globalization or the next version of it, right? I mean, we are looking more inward as a country.
That's right. What I see happening here is that globalization, in the sense of moving things around the world in giant containers, is past its prime. Okay. Trade as a share of the world's GDP peaked in 2008. Foreign investment as a share of the world's GDP peaked back around the same time. International bank lending as a share of world GDP peaked. Okay, so in all of those senses, globalization has actually been receding a bit. It doesn't mean it's going away. It doesn't mean we're stopping trade. But trade for many years grew twice as fast as the world economy, and it's been growing recently much more slowly than the world economy. What we're seeing, though, is a shift in trade away from shipping goods around the world and moving services and moving ideas around the world. So I think what we see domestically out of that is that different kinds of jobs are going to be subject to the pressures of globalization. Not so much perhaps the manufacturing jobs, because there's less pressure to globalize manufacturing, but more for a lot of services work, office work, things that previously have been hard to globalize in many cases.
Hey, Marc, we got to take a quick break. Can you stick around for a few more minutes?
Okay, happy to.
Hey, folks, we're on with Marc Levinson. He is an economist, historian, and author of Outside the Box. He's written several books, and that just happens to be the latest, together with Dr. Rich Rothman. Still a lot more to talk about on trade. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, man, we've had a really good show today. It has flown right by, and still much, much more to cover in this short period that we have left. And we're very pleased to have with us Marc Levinson, who is an economist, historian, author of several books, and his latest book, Outside the Box, deals with globalization. Marc, a couple of things. I'm a manufacturer of appliances, kitchen appliances, sold to both the commercial markets and the consumer markets. I have a number of factories here in the U.S. I own a number of brands, like 17 different brands, and it's a great business. And for my factories, I import a lot from China of materials and components, motors, and just different things that we use in the day-to-day manufacturing of our products. About half of what we buy from China is materials that we use in American products, American-made products, like my own products. I mean, that supply chain has taken years, 30 years to develop. Another thing that I will tell you is that we do have certain products made in Asia. We own the tooling. We own all the intellectual property. And with this surge of business going on right now, the China factories are just absolutely bulging with business. I got to tell you, they're charging premiums. Their deliveries are out already to January, February. Despite all of this bashing of China going on by both sides, right? That, you got to break away from China. We got to take our supply chain away from China. That ain't happening. It's going to cost billions, many billions of dollars for American companies alone to try to break that supply chain. And it's going to take years and years and years to do it. I don't care what the politicians say. That is the reality. So our economy and the China economy is about as closely aligned as it has been forever, and maybe even more so since the pandemic, because so many things that we needed from the pandemic come from China. And a lot of saber rattling about, oh, no, we got to take all that back. Yeah, maybe you could start maybe in some very select areas, but it's going to be years and years and years before any dent is made into that. What do you say? That's what I see on the ground. That's what I experience. But maybe you have a different opinion.
I see a couple of things related to that. I don't think that there's going to be a great flight from China. Absolutely not. I do think that a lot of businesses misjudged the situation when they started building these global supply chains. In particular, they focused on production cost and transportation cost, and they figured it was cheaper to make the thing in another country, China or Mexico or wherever else, and send it to the United States or send it to Europe. As time went on, I think a lot of businesses realized that they really hadn't accounted properly for risk. Running these supply chains in the way that many companies did exposed them to risk of business interruption, whether it was a fire or a strike or an earthquake or a trade dispute or whatever it was. One reaction to that has been that many companies have moved away from sole source suppliers. So where once they might have had a factory in China that supplied their entire needs for a particular product, now they might have a couple of factories in different locations. Now they might use different routings to move their goods. Now they might use different ship lines to move their goods. They're concerned about redundancy. And retailers have done very much the same. Retailers have very much changed their shipping patterns, in part to give them more alternatives so that they don't get stuck if something goes wrong. And while those things reduce risk, they also make globalization a bit less attractive financially. And so I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the change. And it's on the margin. It's not like everybody is slamming the door to China and coming back across the Pacific. It's nothing like that at all. It's that companies are making often very sensible decisions to be a little bit more diverse in terms of where they make things and how they ship things.
You know, it's very, very interesting. You were for a while, for two things that really stand out in your background that are just wonderful. One would be The Economist, which is one of my favorite magazines that I ever read when I used to produce Latin Trade magazine and I produced Latin CEO. And you also worked with the Council on Foreign Relations. And Neil, they were on the forefront. When we were doing development in Latin America, they were on the forefront with terms of seminars and all the information they can hand out in treatises that they put out on what trade really meant and how important it was. So where do we go from here? How is this going to resolve itself, do you think?
Well, I think what we've got here is that the globalization on the manufacturing side becomes less of a huge issue. And there are a couple of reasons for that. You know, one is that, frankly, if you think about what the manufactured goods are, a lot of this is designed to produce consumer goods for the world market. And the world market is growing older, okay? There's consumer goods, physical products are just a lot less important for the economy in the United States or the economy in Europe or the economy in Japan or even the economy in China than they were a few years ago. And we're seeing that services account for a much larger share of people's spending. That really has ramifications for the way we think about globalization. Globalization is dealing more and more with the sorts of services that people consume every day. Consider what you've been watching on your television set during this pandemic, okay? A lot of it is from other countries, and it's being made available to viewers in the United States. That's an import of services. I had the experience not too long ago of having a photograph made. My photographer took a picture of me and then sent it off to Pakistan for retouching. Okay, that's an export of photographic services. Who'd have ever thought that just a photographer would have an international supply chain? We're seeing a lot of this type of globalization now, and that's going to affect a different group of workers in the United States. The folks who actually are tied into manufacturing aren't going to be so affected, but some of the people who are engaged in service or white-collar work may be more affected.
Marc, we're going to have to end it there. I mean, America has traditionally done very good in services export, so maybe that's a good thing for the United States. Hey, Marc, unfortunately, we're out of time. And Rich, you know, it's been a wonderful show. You know, we've taken it right to the final moments here, but unfortunately, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.